This episode is brought to you by Iams Pet Food. When you choose Iams dry dog or cat food, you can see a difference in your pet with your own eyes. Healthy energy in 5 days, healthy digestion in 10 days, and healthy skin and coat in just 25 days. Satisfaction for you and them. Guaranteed or your money back. Feed Iams dry dog or cat food and see a visible difference. Visit iams.com/difference to learn more.
It's game time. And if you've got a hunch about this NBA season, you could turn it into a big win on FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win.
Ooh, that guy's hotter than a microwave burrito.
Now that's a red hot hunch.
21 plus and present in Virginia. Must be first online real money wager. $5 deposit required. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus vest that expires 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
How do you feel great on vacation? Like really good? Easy. You go to Aruba. You'll spend your time relaxing on cool white sand beaches and floating in healing blue water. You'll immerse yourself in natural wonder and find your center on an island where things move at your speed. You won't just feel great. You'll feel relaxed, renewed, and ready for life. That's the Aruba effect. Plan your trip at Aruba.com.
Hello and welcome to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. I'm your host, Rich Ferraro, and we're recording in the immediate aftermath of Forest having a 3-1 reverse at home to Newcastle United. Forest's only second defeat of the season and the second one to come at home. And Baz, you're here with me, and I think we both had a slight suspicion that this one wasn't going to go our way. There's a whole host of factors from your perspective. The fact that you missed the West Ham match meant you're going to come back and see Forest not be at their best. There was the player and the manager of the month curse, and of course the fact that Newcastle, you know, they're no mugs, and they were in the ascendant after their victory against Arsenal last week. Now, the way that I've summed this up is to say that actually it shows that I reckon that Forest are basically 2 years behind Newcastle. You know, there's a lot of similarities in terms of the style of play, in terms of the tactics, and in terms of, you know, having some exciting attacking players in particular. But we're not there yet, and I think this match proved it. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest difference between the two sides was half their midfield was world class and half our midfield was good but not world class.
Yeah, and I said after just a few minutes of the game, this is going to be a game that's won or lost in midfield. And I said that because at that moment in time, I could see that Newcastle were dominating that area of the park. So let's just have a few match facts. Forest did take the lead in the first half. A first goal in senior football for Murillo, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But in the second half, it was pretty much a deserved victory for Newcastle, with goals from Isak, Joe Linton, and Harvey Barnes, who always scores against Forest. So just starting off with the team news, it was unchanged. And were you surprised to see no changes to the starting lineup?
I wasn't surprised. I know that after the West Ham game, Nuno hinted that both Gibbs White and Elliot Anderson weren't fit. So I was there was always that little question, would Anderson start instead of Gibbs White? But you're not going to be surprised when Gibbs White starts for us if he's available.
I mean, he's the talisman, isn't he?
Yeah. And then the back five, that selects itself at the moment. Yates and Dominguez, they select themselves as well, really, given that Danilo and Ibra are both out. And yeah, Wood's a given. So, yeah. And the two wingers, they're the starting wingers. So it wasn't a surprise at all.
Okay. And I mean, it was a blood and thunder game, wasn't it? And in the first half, there were, there was a lot of cat and mouse, I thought. But the thing that I would say summed it up from my perspective as a Reds fan, and we will hear from a Newcastle fan a little bit later on, But from my perspective as a Reds fan, I just thought that we just looked that little bit more ragged than we had done in the last 2 or 3 matches. What do you think?
Excuse me. I thought there were a lot of times where we were sloppy. Passes going, the obvious one would be Hudson-Odoi putting 2 passes astray to create a chance for them in the first sort of 20 minutes or so. But it was happening all the time. We just couldn't we couldn't keep hold of the ball in any way. And I wouldn't go as strong as to say it was against the run of play that we scored, but it was a surprise. It was Newcastle that definitely looked more like scoring throughout the first half.
Mm-hmm. But as you say, it was, despite there being a lot of kind of edge of the box type of stuff going on, there's a lot of kind of breaking. Both teams seem to want to counterattack. But in terms of that, going back to that analogy I said of Newcastle being 2 or 3 years ahead in the development compared to Forest, I think that the fact that Forest aren't a possession team and Newcastle are now comfortable in possession, I think was something that was quite telling. The other thing that was quite telling is that I thought that their left-hand side, which worked really well against Arsenal last week, was also giving us problems today. So they had Lewis Hall at left back, they had Joe Willock playing nominally left of a midfield 3 and Joe Linton playing as nominally a left winger. But the movement of those 3, and in particular Willock and Joe Linton, was causing problems. And I thought that was something that was really, luckily, Ola Aina happens to be one of the best right backs in the league at the moment, and he was able to nullify that. And again, that's something that I think is worth coming back to a little bit later on. But it was Forest that took the lead, and it was a moment where Anthony Elanga's pace, just like the red card that was received by Edson Alvarez last week, it was Elanga's pace that basically forced Willock into a mistake where he absolutely took out the winger. And a few weeks ago, we were discussing, weren't we, about how Elanga, his involvement wasn't. He's always going to be fast and he's always going to be tricky, but his involvement in the dangerous areas wasn't enough. And I think Nuno's way of overcoming that is to get him taking a lot of the set pieces. And it was a flat ball across at head height, and Murillo ran in, and Alexander Isak rather charitably left that space, which meant that the Brazilian had a free header. And I don't know about you, but I thought there was a little bit of extra gusto in the celebrations from both players and fans once they realised who had scored the goal.
I thought my absolute favourite, obviously I'm overjoyed that he scored after all this time, and it's almost sad in a way that it was a 5-yard goal instead of a 70-yard screamer, but he's been threatening. Although he did try that later on. However, my favourite bit about it was he did his little Brazilian samba dance with Anthony Elanga and then celebrated with his teammates. But while the teammates ran back to the centre circle, he made a point of going over to A block and celebrating with them as well, which I thought was really a nice touch and shows what it means to him.
Yeah. So 1-0 to Forest, and let's be honest, it was pretty much the first proper attempt on goal from either team. Certainly the first time
they had a shot go wide, I think, before that.
Yeah,
they Hudson-Odoi giving the ball away.
Yes, and it was I think if I remember rightly, it was Willock who tried to curl the ball around the post, but it went the wrong side from a Newcastle perspective, the right side from a Forest perspective. There was a shot on target not long afterwards, so Bruno Guimaraes got the ball onto his left foot and had a curling effort, lacked the power, so cells were stretching, but you'd have asked questions of the keeper if he'd let it past.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I'm mentioning that isn't just because it's the first save that Cells had to make, but it was also because that was symptomatic of Forest getting slightly overrun in the midfield area, would you say?
Yeah. So again, this is... we were sloppy. We were giving the ball away when we had it. Now, part of me that's a combination of two things. One, we were poor in possession. I mean, we were making sloppy passes that were running short instead of having the right pace on them to reach the man, or they were just slightly like at half a yard in the wrong direction. But that's also testament to how good Newcastle were defensively. They weren't putting in challenges, but their positioning was really good so that we had to make more difficult passes. They were cutting out all our easy options as well. So the combination of those two things meant we basically, as soon as we got possession, we just gave it straight back to them. And that would meant that the pressure was gradually building. And the bloke next to me did say at some point, he's got to change it, but I don't know what changes we can make because we don't even get the ball, which kind of sums it up, really.
Yeah, and I was thinking actually that I was expecting Jota to come on the right wing, not just because it's a tried and trusted substitution that Nuno's been doing quite a lot, also because towards, I think it's after about 35 minutes, Joe Linton and Gordon swapped positions. So Anthony Gordon went onto the left wing and Joe Linton came onto the right-hand side. And we all know that Moreno isn't the strongest defender, but we also knew that Gordon is a tricky player, so Aina would need a bit more help and we'd need that work rate of Jota. And yeah, I mean, that substitution did come to pass a little bit later on with Jota coming on the right-hand side, but we'll come back to that.
The thing that was telling about the first half was, as you say, there was a lot, both sides wanted to play on the counter. Elanga was getting a lot of grief from where I was sitting, because quite often, if the ball's played in front of him, then he can use his pace to run onto it. But if it's played to him or behind him, he would turn and then just play it backwards. And then there was a couple of other times where we'd get a break on, and whether it was Elanga or whoever it was that was breaking free, would almost slow down and hesitate as they approached the box, and then the chance would be gone. And part of me is wondering whether that is, again, the bloke next to me was complaining about it. And I was like, I wonder if that's basically they're just worried about getting hit on the counter-attack by Newcastle, because Newcastle, just like us, are deadly on the counter. And I think the second half is testament to what happens if you play up and don't worry about counter-attacks, because that's how they pulled us to pieces in the second half.
Just before I come on to that, I think it's also worth pointing out a couple of moments. So one was a move where Forest broke and Dan Burn took out Morgan Gibbs-White and he got a yellow card for it. But there was a slight delay there because there was a check to see if Ryan Yates had elbowed Tino Livramento. And there was clearly contact between the arm of Yates and Livramento. It's one of those where, as a Reds fan, you kind of go, well, it's an accident. And as a Newcastle fan, you say, well, Yates did it deliberately. I would say the first angle I saw, I thought, nah, you can't give anything for that. And then the second angle I saw, Yates did glance across and he saw Livramento there, which does change the emphasis slightly. But it's one of those, I suspect, from VAR's perspective, whereby they're saying there's not enough to make it into a red and therefore we can't do anything. And therefore, Byrne had to get the yellow card because he did take out Gibbs-White after the ball had gone. And then the other one is there was a soft but reasonable penalty appeal when Elanga challenged Joe Willock in the area, and I think he probably did go through the back of Willock's leg a bit. So it's just that question about, I know, as a parallel, Reds fans, if you haven't seen it yet, think about Gio Reyna being brought down by Ashley Young in the first of the penalty incidents from the Everton match last season, when the referee was, of course, Anthony Taylor. But we'll come back to that.
There's also my Newcastle supporting friend sent me a screenshot. He was watching it on Sky, and he sent me a screenshot from the first half of Ryan Yates. I think it's Byrne, and Ryan Yates, his studs up into Byrne's thigh,
It's Longstaff.
Longstaff, yeah.
Yeah, and the consensus from the Sky commentators and pundits was that Longstaff did him a favour, because if he'd gone down, the referee probably would have had to give a foul and give a card, and it would have probably been a yellow because there wasn't any intent. But yeah, Yates's foot was up, and it's one of those all of those incidents fall very much firmly into the you've seen them given category. But as it was 1-0 at half time.
The 1865 match report.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
So the second half began badly for Forest. We knew that we'd had difficult times in the first half. We knew that Newcastle were defending from the front and they were quick on the attack, and they took advantage of it, basically, didn't they? So it was firstly an effort where Guimaraes came in from the right-hand side. I think it was either, I can't remember who exactly it was. It might have been Joe Linton he exchanged passes with, and he did an effort with the outside of his right foot, which went just over. Then we saw a moment whereby Nicolas Dominguez, he wasn't in the position he'd usually be because he'd just gone off injured. And so the referee waved him off to the side of the pitch, just in front of where you sit, in front of the Brian Clough stand, which meant that when he was waved back on and Chris Wood played the ball into the channel, Dominguez was there, he legged it. He got into the box, he looked up and saw Elanga was the only option, but he was behind him. And so he had an effort on goal, which was on target. Pope had to make the save with his feet. It was one of those whereby, you know, it counts as a decent effort, but
it was...
There's
two things to say about that one, actually. So what I'd say is when Newcastle came out in the second half, they decided they were going to press right from the front. So we were kind of locked in just on our D, or just behind our D, and every time we tried to play a pass, or basically we were all the sort of 11 players were man marked in that area. So that meant that Dominguez went down, but I have a suspicion he went down just to buy us some breathing time and took the 30 seconds. But then, yes, it also meant that because they were so high up the pitch that when we did get the break, we had lots of space to run into.
Yeah.
But it was also telling that, Dominguez didn't have any options but to make that shot. Ordinarily, in one of our breaks, you make the shot, rebounds off the keeper, and someone's coming in to follow up on it. And there was no one there for that follow-up either.
Yeah, and say it's a decent save by Pope, but if it has to be a very good strike to beat a keeper from that position. Yeah. And Nico Dominguez, we know he can score, but he's not exactly a goal-scoring midfielder. So I would like to say, because he didn't finish the match, but I would like to say that Dominguez continued his blisteringly good form from the past 2 or 3 matches. And I thought he was my candidate for man of the match until he got substituted. But just after the effort, that's when Newcastle took the lead. And having done so much to improve on set pieces, Forest did concede from a set piece on this occasion. It was a corner that came from Anthony Gordon in front of the Newcastle fans. Chris Wood went up alongside, I think it was Longstaff. And the ball bounced off sort of Wood's face, I think, and therefore bounced downwards. And therefore, it meant that if it had taken a true bounce, then it probably would have been easier to deal with. But it meant that it kind of went downwards, straight to Isak. Milenkovic couldn't get his leg around in time. Isak did an instinctive shot, which hit the post and was in. And, I mean, to be honest, it wasn't a big surprise, was it?
No, it had been coming. And it's disappointing that it was a free kick. But I was just watching some tactical video the other day about Newcastle, and the video had 4 or 5 recent Newcastle goals, where Longstaff, according to the data, wasn't involved. He didn't get an assist. He didn't count as a key pass or anything like that. But this video was basically showing how his movement was putting the defenders off, which is what made the space. And that's exactly what happened today.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very nice way of putting it. Forest brought on Anderson and Jota for Gibbs White and Hudson-Odoi, with Alanga moving to the left wing and Anderson playing in the 10 role. And just shortly afterwards, actually, there was a slightly spicy moment because Jota made a run, mazy run, went into the left-hand channel, took on a couple of defenders. As he chopped back, Byrne chopped across him. It was one of those where he took the ball, but he also took Jota. It's one of those where there were questions about whether Byrne should have had a second yellow card. Now, I'm going to hold my hands up here and say no. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's not like it was. I thought it was more clumsy than anything else. But from where I was, I didn't see that he'd taken the ball. My Newcastle supporting friend immediately texted me saying Byrne took the ball, to which I replied Gibbs White took the ball and got a 2-match ban for it. So,
well, that might be going in the podcast clip.
But yeah, I just thought it had been a clumsy challenge. So I wasn't surprised that a second yellow one given. I was listening in the radio on the car on the way to the radio in the car on the way back. And he was saying you could see it being given as a first yellow, but not as a second, because it would have been a very, very harsh sending off. But then, as I said, too much ban for Gibbs White then.
Well, yes, quite. Isak, I thought he had a volley where him and Willock had a nice bit of interplay. Again, it's counter-attack, wasn't it? And the ball came across from Willock. Isak found the space, wrapped his long leg around it. I thought it was in, all ends up. And I have to say, there was just a minute or two where I just thought that was the chance. If Forest are going to get back into it, then that's going to be the moment. But actually, it didn't work out that way, did it?
No, and this is the thing is, even though you'd have to describe it as we were under the cosh the entire second half, but we were making all half chances or almost chances. Newcastle did look vulnerable to our counterattacks. It's just we couldn't quite capitalise on them. So I thought, yeah, we can get into this game. We could take 3 points, and they will feel disappointed because they will feel like they should have won. But it would be a valid victory for us. And then because we were occasionally pushing forwards like this, then yeah, we opened ourselves up to their counterattacks, and they just did it better than we did.
Yeah. And going back to where I started, tactically, both teams have got quite a similar approach. They defend from the front, they counterattack. I think, let's not kid ourselves. I think Joe Linton has got more quality than Anthony Elanga, for example. So you can't really argue with that. And Joe Linton, we talked about Guimaraes' shot in the first half and the one he had at the start of the second half. And Joe Linton kind of showed his captain how it should be done, didn't he? Because he did he was fed by Alexander Isak. He was on the right-hand side, and Elanga tried to come back from the left channel and to kind of steal the ball off his toe. Joe Linton it looks simple, but it's one of those whereby if you're a confident player, who's confident in your own ability, he just cut inside, took out Elanga completely, and gave himself the space to be able to get his left foot around it and finished it into the bottom corner. And, it's a poor goal to concede from our perspective, but it's also a quality goal from Joe Linton.
I would say after the game, Nuno said they did to us what we do to other teams. And that's the perfect description, because not only did they catch us on the break, but then they did a Callum Hudson-Odoi just from the other wing.
That's a nice way of putting it. And then that goal came on the 72nd minute. And of course, the substitutions were being made alongside that. So not long afterwards, we saw Dominguez go off and Ramon Sosa come on, which basically saw Elanga go into a sort of a number 10-ish type role. And Anderson, well, nominally dropped back a little bit, but he didn't really. And then we had the third goal. So Harvey Barnes, And I said to Mrs. Ferraro, he always scores against us, and it didn't take long before he did. And it was exactly what you'd expect from Harvey Barnes. He took on his fullback. He just found a yard of space. He took the shot. Milenkovic had been trying to hold him up, and at first glance, you think Sells should have done better. But actually, I think he took the slightest nick off the inside of Milenkovic's ankle, which is why Sells was slightly wrong-footed.
Just want to say, add to that one.
It's what you expect.
It was a counter-attack, and Harvey Barnes did a Callum Hudson-Odoi on us.
Well, there you go. There you go. The last throws of the dice were in terms of bringing on... we brought on the last couple of subs who were Ward-Prowse coming on for Moreno, and Taiwo Awoniyi came on for Anthony Elanga. I mean, the game was gone by that point, I think it's fair to say.
And yeah, we ended up playing a back three with Ola Aina as the third centre-half, with the two wingers playing as wing-backs and then two up front. So
3-5-2, essentially.
It was, yeah, but it was kind of obvious that the team really weren't set up to play that way. So it was and you can see why it's like, right, we need to chase this, put two strikers on, but it just didn't work. So whereas we looked kind of dangerous before, we didn't look dangerous at all in the end.
And when we go to a 5-4-1, when we're in the lead, you can tell that that's very much game plan. That's something that's really been practiced and drilled, and this didn't. No, it looked like they were just... And you could see what you might not have seen is Nuno's face when the Barnes goal went in. He knew the game was up, I think it's fair to say. Worth pointing out a couple of things. Nuno, you've mentioned what his post-match comments were. I think the thing that might annoy a few fans, so the fans who are likely to get despondent about defeats, which obviously we know that people do, the one that's going to annoy him is say that the performance wasn't too bad. So I think a lot of fans are saying, well, we didn't play as well as we would like to. But I would refer back to what you said, which is that, that Newcastle out-forested Forest, didn't they? Mm-hmm. They did a really good job on that. Just the other thing tactically, Chris Wood obviously has been on fire, and he didn't have a sniff in this game. And this reminds me of something he said right after Nuno became the head coach, which is saying it's difficult to score when you're a good 20 yards further away from goal. He was deep a lot this time. The service wasn't there. And so he was fighting a bit of a losing battle.
And that comes back to the tactics. When we got the ball on the wings, they tripled up on our wingers and fullbacks to prevent any overlap, which meant that there was. And then what I said right at the start, which is their midfield was better than ours. Guimaraes was man marking Morgan, so tripling up on the wings and then man marking Morgan, where Guimaraes is a world-class midfielder and Morgan didn't get a sniff of the ball or couldn't do anything with it when he did get it. What that meant was there was absolutely no service. And we all know that Chris Wood isn't a Stan Collymore who's going to beat four people and stick it in the top corner. He needs that service. And their game plan was prevent the ball getting anywhere near Chris Wood. And it worked.
Yeah. I mean, and that thing you mentioned about Morgan's kind of most exciting moment was that moment when he broke in the first half and Byrne got the yellow card. But even then, even if Morgan had got past, then it's like there wasn't that much on. Yeah, there was Elanga who's starting to make a run on the right-hand side and Wood starting to make a run on the left-hand side. But yeah, who knows? Right, so you've heard our perspective as Reds fans. Now let's head over to Jack Stanley to give the Newcastle side of things.
Hello, it's Jack, Newcastle United fan based in Australia, a member of the Toon Under podcast. This was an interesting game for Newcastle. There was definitely nerves before this due to Forest's form. Although Newcastle do obviously have a good record at the City Ground in recent years. It was the second best defence against the third best defence, so I didn't feel like there was going to be much in this game. And we were coming back into this game off the back of picking up some decent results and some more confidence over the last few weeks. Although we've still only won one game out of 5 on the road this season, so it was definitely going to be a big ask against an informed Forest. I felt like the first half was fairly even. I could tell early that we were playing quite well. Like, there's been other games this season, like Fulham and even Wolves, which we won, where we weren't playing well and we were making all sorts of basic mistakes. But the team's a bit more settled now, and I think that it was an unchanged team from the last game, and you could tell that we were in nick a bit. We were looking okay. It was a bad goal to concede, and it was just a really basic defensive action we maybe should have done. And I felt like there was some strange refereeing going on. I know that you've got a bit of history with Anthony Taylor. From a Newcastle perspective, I don't know why it took 7 fouls for Ryan Yates to be booked, but I know that Forest have probably got some gripes as well with potential penalty calls, and Dan Burn potentially could have got a second yellow, so he's not everyone's favourite referee, I think, fair to say. But I don't think that impacted the result of the game. We reacted really well to conceding, and I felt like we had a chance in the second half, and the second half performance is probably the best that we've played over a 45-minute period all season, and it's definitely the most clinical. We'd only scored 10 league goals this season, which was one of the lowest in the league before this game. Howe decided to switch it up a bit, and he moved Joe Linton to the right-hand side, brought Anthony Gordon to the left-hand side, and Joe Linton obviously scored that really good goal for 2-1, and then it was a nice counter-attack when Forest were pushing for an equaliser. I felt like we were quite safe and comfortable throughout that second half, which was a bit of a strange feeling for Newcastle. We haven't had that for a little while. Forest obviously didn't seem at their best today. Maybe it was the curse of the manager and the player of the month coming to bite them. But we've definitely started to click a bit in recent weeks, and I think our squad, if we can keep everybody fit, we should be pushing for top 6. We might get some reinforcements in January as well. I just do want to say I've really enjoyed watching Forest this season. Chris Wood and Elliot Anderson, we've got a real soft spot, so good luck to Forest for the rest of the season, and we will see you on the return leg later in the season. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Jack. So we come into the international break now, so a chance to regroup. Obviously, it's much nicer to go into that on a win. It'll be interesting to see, what happens in terms of, for example, will Morgan get pulled out of the England squad? I don't think he will, but he still doesn't look himself, to my mind. The other thing I just want to finish up with is it didn't take very long in this match for there to be chants by the Forest fans about Anthony Taylor. Do we want to have any words about the referee? Because I'm just going to preempt that by saying that the thing that would make me happy, regardless of the result, would be if we're not talking about the ref after the game. So what do you think, Baz?
Might be controversial, but I think he did all right.
I thought he was fine. There was the chant, "It's all about you, Anthony Taylor." But for the most part, I thought that he did okay. I think what was crucial is that he was trying to be as consistent as possible. So, for example, that potential second yellow card for Byrne, but you also look at the fouls by Yates where he could have got yellow cards. He didn't want to get his card out, and he was being consistent. I think that's all we ever ask for, isn't it?
The Newcastle fans would probably be more annoyed at him than we should be had any right to be.
Yeah, which just goes to show, doesn't it? It's not about bias, it's about competence and consistency. And on this occasion, I thought he did all right. So thank you very much to you, Baz. Thank you very much to Jack. And thank you, listener, for joining us. Worth also pointing out that, as usual, we'll have our range of shows to bring you over the next few days. So we'll have our women's show, which will be coming up in your feed. It has had a little break for the last couple of weeks due to various circumstances, but we will be back in the middle of the week. And we also we'll be back with our Friday 5 on regular news roundup, which will come to you at the end of the week. And as it is an international break, we also want to bring you a new podcast at the weekend, next weekend, which is going to be reviewing the season so far and how we think things have gone. It is worth pointing out that although the first team, men's first team, didn't win today, that we do have a little bit of cheer, which is that the women's team have won today 2-0 away at West Bromwich. And that means that although they are no longer top of the table, they do have a game in hand on Wolves, and with 2 points in the balance there. So come on, you Reds.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
HBCUs, they're more than just schools, right? They're where we learn, grow, and build. It's a place where we're free to be ourselves, innovate, and live our best lives while chasing those dreams, and yes, securing that bag. But the journey to success is not always easy. That's why Walmart is here for you every step of the way. From late night study sessions to game day celebration, Walmart's got your back, helping you manifest those big, audacious dreams. Whether you're starting a business, climbing the career ladder, or figuring it all out, Walmart is here supporting Black excellence at HBCUs. At the end of the day, your hustle, your creativity, and your journey matter. Walmart, we're all about empowering you with the spark to keep pushing forward. So let's get to it together. Learn more about how we are amplifying your story at walmart.com/Black and Unlimited. It's your journey, and we're proud to be a part of it.